I mean, I think that the unifying component of the invitation as an organization is is that it's offering a way out of grief. It's offering a sense of relief from the sorrow that we all feel when we encounter tremendous loss. And so I think, in a way, that was probably the nugget that drew me to the film in the first place, was this idea that we could all benefit from less pain in our life, right? I mean, who doesn't want less pain? And yet, what I think the film is asking, I think that everyone who joins the invitation has a very meaningful set of experiences that drive them toward wanting relief from pain and sorrow. And my hope is that that's actually pretty relatable, pretty sympathetic. I think that Charles Manson and that terrible episode in California's history um, is definitely a touch point for the invitation. But I also think there were all kinds of organizations or cults or religions, however you want to identify them, that speak to this universal desire to escape the self and surrender the self to something bigger. And so, in the case of the references to Charles Manson and the Sharon Tate murders, um, really what that was very much about was a reference to California and to Los Angeles in particular as a place in which a lot of people gather here looking to start over, looking to remake their identity. And it was very much a nod to a kind of culture in which a dinner party like this is frankly even possible, in which it's a little loosey goosey and a little bit boundary pushing and honestly just a little bit scary and uncomfortable. I think we were all drawing on our own experiences. Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi, the screenwriters, and myself, we were all drawing on our own experiences of living in LA, particularly at the beginning, and some of the feelings we had that we were sometimes out of our depth in social situations that felt like they had codes or meanings that eluded us. As people, I think we struggle to understand what happens when we lose our identity. What does it mean? What have we lost? How have we lost it? And I think for a lot of people, the obsession with cults is both a sense of an attempt to reassure ourselves that that's not who we are, as well as an attempt to understand perhaps how close any of us are to actually signing up for belief systems that harm us. And so, for me, as somebody who grew up in a largely agnostic household, yet grew up in Missouri, and saw the effects of what I would define as religious fanaticism in my own life, in my family's life, in the culture at large, and then to see how that continues to affect regular people's lives every day. I think, in a way, our obsession with cults is ultimately our obsession with our own frailty as people, our own vulnerability as people. And it's a desire, I hope, to try and connect to other people's frailty and try to find a way out and try and find a way toward, I hope, a better understanding of how we could even get to this place, I mean, I think Eden in particular is a very difficult character because, on the one hand, in the world and in the experience of the film, she might be considered an antagonist, and yet she's also incredibly fragile and emotionally very, very stricken and very unstable. And so it was important that we find an actor who could play those layers and make them feel real and make the transitions between all of those states feel real and familiar and um, I don't want to say really so much sympathetic as relatable, you know. And I do think that she was a particularly gifted member of the cast. She has such a kind of an openness toward really finding the edge of a performance. It's a really interesting question about that you're asking about when is it appropriate to name the elephant in the room or to point out the utter strangeness potentially of a situation. And I think I think by and large, most of us look to protect other people by not pointing out some embarrassing or potentially damaging reality that everyone seems to see together. I think that there's a kind of interesting, compassionate desire to avoid other people's embarrassment, but or of course selfishly to avoid embarrassing ourselves. But in the end, I do think that calling something out for what it is a very powerful experience and also incredibly necessary for any kind of real change to occur. People have to walk out onto a ledge in which they might make a fool of themselves, right? Or seem alarmist or paranoid. And a big part of what drove us to make this movie was our love of a tradition of movies, particularly from the 60s and 70s, that seemed to suggest a world in which it was possible that you be both afraid and paranoid that people were out to get you and living in a world in which people were out to get you. And so that kind of dual and somewhat competing reality is what we're trying to explore with the movie. What's interesting is there was a version of the movie that answered that question, and I won't say how we answered it, but what we realized was that in the end, answering the question didn't actually advance the emotional relationship to the movie. And in fact, the question is what advances that relationship, keeping that alive. And so we did decide in the editing phase to pull that answer out of the film. I mean, I certainly think we have seen what the effects of relentless depictions of fantasy do to our minds as a culture and as individuals, because in some way the noise, for instance, of internet culture and social media culture is just a very, very intricate expression of fantasy. And so um, a lot of times we're not really getting to the truth of something. We're just propagating an untruth or a delusion or a manufactured image of what we'd like people to believe about us. And so for me, it's really important to keep asking myself, to what degree do I want to interface with that culture, that noise, that fantasy when I'm trying to tap into the contours of my own creativity and my own thoughts and philosophy and feelings. And so for me, I'm aware that things have felt like they've been turned up several notches on the volume, but I also am hopeful that as we're seeing the detrimental effects of that, that maybe we can start to regulate ourselves better and treat some of the noise of culture right now the same way we would treat it as smoking cigarettes or injecting hard drugs or drunk driving. Like, it's just not a safe thing for us to do, and it's harming us. And that's kind of where I stand at this point on all of that. Oh, that's such a great point, because one of the things that we always hoped, Phil and Matt and our producers and myself, we always hoped would happen from the film is that you'd watch this movie and you'd feel maybe kind of shaken by it, but that you would look to the person sitting on either side of you in the theater and say, well, I have that person and I have that person. Like, I have people next to me. And that there would be some sense that that's really all that matters is the person next to you. Like, what can you do to walk through the world with the people around you, next to you, in your heart? And so for me, the community component of the story is actually like the crucial underpinning of it, that we're watching a character in Will who has lost his community, who has, to some degree, banished his community, and has come back in to try to reconnect with that community. And in doing so, has to confront a complicated or disturbing reality within it. But that in the end, my hope is that we understand that all we have is each other. That's the only way through, this sometimes really difficult experience called life.